screen? See, it should say it's the end of the year. What do I do now?
Yep, we see it, Debbie.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's answer that question. Um, at the end of the school year, there are a number of responsibilities that are important for you to think about and plan for. And no one likes to kind of leave a job open-ended with a lot of things left over, and no one, especially, and you may have done this before, have to start a job where someone left a lot of things that were unfinished. So it's just important. It makes you look good as a speech pathologist. It also makes our company look good. So we want to make sure that we are on top of things for the end of the school year. Um, okay, so the things we'll be talking about today are files and your materials, communication just in your school and your district, whether or not your district provides you with a specific checklist. Are there some Medicaid and ESY paperwork that you need to handle? And then thinking about some summer homework activities for your students. Okay, so as we said, we want you to think ahead. We're about 6 to 7 weeks away from the end of the year, so now is the time to really look carefully at everything and kind of plan out all the things that you need to do to finish out the school year. And get a checklist or make a checklist, depending on whether or not one's provided for you. And so we'll start with the files. And again, you have to follow what's common or what's your school district's policy is about paperwork. But most people have, or most school districts have some kind of a working file that SLPs keep. And then, I don't know why this thing keeps popping up. And then some have like a district file where things need to go that are saved for posterity. And then most probably school districts have things electronically saved. So it's going to depend on what your school district does, how you handle things. But you need to know what needs to be in that permanent file that the school district keeps for posterity. So are there any things in your working file that maybe need to go to the county office? And then what order should the paperwork be in? I know in my old school district, we had checklists that told us what order the paperwork needed to be in, and what to send in and what to keep in your working file. And then in the working file, we also had some suggestions on how to organize the paper there. And as it says, typically what's most recent stays on top. And then signatures. Make sure that anything that needs to be signed is signed. Of course, we know at the IEP at the end of the meeting, parents sign. Everyone usually signs in at some point during the meeting to show that they were in attendance. So most of that would already have taken place, but just, be sure of that. One district I worked in, we used to complete a checklist, and then we had to have like our lead teacher or our principal or someone in the school sign off that we did all those things. So, again, you got to check and see what your school district's policy is. And just a reminder, never to sign anyone else's signature. There is a huge paper trail through special education and school services for speech and language therapy, and it's very easy. I don't know why this keeps doing this. Okay. It's very easy to track down and we leave a paper trail of things and procedures that have to be done. So, always be sure those signatures can be checked on. And unfortunately, I know a few people who lost their jobs because they signed something saying that someone was there and they weren't, or that kind of thing. Okay, so, again, be conscientious about checking off what really is completed and what hasn't been completed yet. And then the working files, you want to keep them organized and neat. They should be alphabetized, and there should be a file. I helped out at a school, and I'm not sure why, but the SLP did away with all the working files. And so coming in, we had to start from scratch with nothing. So those working files are helpful. Usually you may have something about data or progress reports in there or the current goals and objectives, and that makes it so much easier for the SLP who follows you. If it's not yourself and a new person's coming in, to have that information right at their fingertips and be able to get started. Most schools have locked file cabinets for anything that's IEP related or confidential. So, check on that. Make sure that someone knows where your locked files are for next school year. Many times special ed may have an office and they'll all go in there. Other times each SLP has their own locked file cabinet and they stay in the speech room, but it just kind of depends. And then of course there are those situations where there's fruit basket turnover in the schools moving. Maybe they're under construction or they're going to redo the floors or something, and people get their materials and their even their furniture and everything moved to a new room. So anything you can do to make sure that people know where the speech information is, and if they're going to do some kind of move, putting a label on your file cabinet, speech file cabinet or whatever, helps a lot in keeping track of that information. I know a few situations where the file cabinet got lost and it took most of the year to find it. So because schools are big, and it's sometimes hard to find when they're redoing the floors or moving people around. Okay, and then items most likely needed in your working file, as I mentioned before, the most current IEP, any data sheets or data plans, anything that would help that person, someone pick up and start therapy and know where therapy left off with the students. And then progress reports, again, are really helpful, and any special notes to the next therapist. I remember I found a file and there was a big note from the SLP that said, Mom does not want him pulled for speech during math. So, so you just make sure of those kinds of things. Or the student has a behavior intervention plan and there are specific techniques to use with him for his behavior, check with the special ed teacher. So that just anything that's kind of like a red flag that would help someone know that they need to double check on this or get some information is very helpful. Sometimes I would leave a little note myself. I would leave a note for the next therapist saying, these kids are in second grade and they really work well together. If you can keep them in the same group, that's great. Just a little helpful hints. Okay, and then any extra information that you would want someone to know at the beginning of the school year, such as rewards for some specific kids, or maybe someone worked really well for this kind of reward, so it would help the next therapist to know that. And then I had mentioned grouping kids, but again, those kind of hints. Any specific behaviors that you might need to deal with, or as I mentioned before, specific techniques to handle those behaviors, and then scheduling tips. And I know for our students with autism who have some, very specific types of behaviors and techniques that work with them, that's just a big tip there. If you think of your kids with autism, if there's anything specific you want to leave the therapist for next year. Okay, then Medicaid documentation. Not all school districts bill for Medicaid, but many do. And it's just important to remember that you've got to complete any outstanding or leftover billing or documentation. Sometimes it gets hard at the end of the school year because the schedule gets disrupted and, your kids are coming and going, and so that last couple of weeks of school, it's hard to remember to go back in and make sure that you do that Medicaid documentation. And so this should be a note or be on your organization planning list. Anything you have to do to close out or complete Medicaid documentation. Extended school year. Often in my district, my old district, we started talking about extended school year heavily in March, but actually addressed it all throughout the school year. So, just kind of having a list of kids that are qualifying for ESY or may need it, and then following your school district's guidelines on how to handle that, what kind of paperwork is done. It's usually in the IEP somewhere. There's usually some kind of data that needs data plan that shows where the student's progress ended at the end of the school year, so that whoever's going to work with him in the summer can pick right back up again wherever that therapy left off. Most of the time, ESY there are some really specific guidelines that school districts develop, but if you haven't heard of it before, it's looking at students who show regression or lose what they've gained during the school year over a long break in instruction and therapy. So, and usually it's our more severe students who qualify for it, and not the mild artic or mild language kids. But again, you'll need to check on your school district. And then you have to make sure that you communicate your ESY list to the appropriate people. And my district was pretty large, so we would actually have an ESY coordinator for different areas of the county, and we would have to send in our paperwork and to a certain specific person, and that person would then begin to get the teachers and therapists and anyone who's needed to provide that service during the summer. So again, just make sure that you're clear on where it needs to go. It's really important not to forget that, because we've had situations where a parent knows their student's supposed to have ESY and just shows up at the school or facility, and there's no paperwork and no goals and no materials. So then we don't look very good. So anyways, that's important. And then most school districts have you prepare materials for your ESY students. And I think especially to get them started. I don't know that you have to do lesson plans for the whole summer, but again, you've got to check and see what's expected of you. But definitely some materials to help the new therapists get going over the summer. And then let's kind of talk about your therapy materials. And of course, you have your personal therapy materials, and then you have the ones that belong to your school, and then sometimes you have ones that belong to your speech department or to the special education department. So hopefully there is an inventory. I know I did not always find one. But usually in the larger counties, there's someone who has an inventory list. And so you want to kind of take a look at that. Hopefully you had one or were given one at the beginning of the school year, so now you can go back and compare, update any new or added items, return any materials that belong to special education or specific teachers or the media center, or if you borrowed things. In our district, we often shared materials with each other, other SLPs, so make sure you know where the material has to go. If you borrowed things from your first school and you took them to your second school, you want them all back where they started. And then, it's important to kind of differentiate between materials that you may have bought from using your COB pediatric therapy money. And I don't know if Joni, you want to just jump in there a minute about that. But those would belong, I don't know, those would be things the therapist would want to keep separate. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Deb, I was trying to get off mute. Anything that is your material, and it should have started from the beginning, whether you've bought it before with your stipend, should have your name on it, and that stuff should go home with you unless the school has given you permission to leave it at the school if you know you're going to be returning. Most therapists do take it home just in case with moving and cleaning, you have your own stuff with you. So you can do it either way. I would just get permission if you know you're returning to make sure you can leave it at the school over the summer.
Yeah, that's great. And make sure you label it, and even it wouldn't hurt to put your name and personal materials or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. And then sometimes, like I said, if the school is doing a big overhaul and clearing out rooms and then doing something, then all the materials will go back, or they're moving rooms, and speech pathologists often have their rooms changed. So you want to make sure that you really do label everything well, so that everybody knows, oh, those are the speech materials. Those go to the speech therapist. So, and it often helps if you just do a little searching and find out, you know, as far as if they're moving things around, where is the safest place for me to store my materials? Just sometimes, like I said, things get a little crazy. So, okay, I think that was it for materials. And then it kind of is going along with the same things we just talked about your personal belongings, and checking, and just checking with other folks at your school how to prepare your room for the summer. And some schools are real specific and have a list, and then others are real laid back about it. And sometimes I would go to the other SLPs if there's another one there, or the special ed teachers, and then of course an administrator if I needed to, just to make sure I knew how they wanted things packed up. And then we always like to recommend that you think about some things that you could do with your kids or send home with your kids for summer. And it's a great way. Parents actually really appreciate it. It's a great way for them to keep active and keep their skills up over the summer. There are many different ways you can do it. I used to make a folder, but you could just do, actually one general sheet for all students. And sometimes that sheet can have just fun things, thinking, language activities, practice activities that for like 2 months. I've seen people do them on a calendar, one page calendar for maybe June and another page for July. And for each day there's some little tip or idea that the kids can do. You don't always have to do the weekends, but just something that would keep them going. Some people post their handouts up on their website, the school's website, or if the speech pathologist has their own website, and that way the parents who are interested will go and get it. And if the others aren't, that's okay. The only thing about the website handout is to be conscious of, the type of population you're working with, because if we have some lower socioeconomic families or families that are kind of struggling financially, they may not have access to the website, or they may not have internet. I mean, almost everybody does, but there are a few that may not. So in that case, you might want to send them home, maybe just to selected students, and then let all the others know that they can access it on your website. Also, every year I used to get a list of activities going on in my area, camps, often for kids with disabilities, workshops, fun activities. So if you, see any of those, make a list. You can send those home, or you can send them home with their homework sheet, so that, fun places to go and use your language skills or whatever. Parents really appreciate that too. So you can make it fun and, kind of lighthearted, not as intense as therapy, but also keeping them, keeping their skills in mind, helping them remember to use them in different situations throughout the summer. Joni and Tiffany, do you have any suggestions as far as summer activities, some things you may have seen your therapist use?
Sorry, Debbie.
Yes,
I was trying to get off mute again. I know that my
We'll take turns.
Go ahead, Tiff. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I know that there is a slide that's coming up with like some different websites, but Debbie, I've really seen a variety of these different things done. So like you said, one general sheet that just has some different activities that can be used for students across the caseload. But then I've also known of therapists who have actually kind of customized more specific homework packets for students on their caseload. So I agree that it can be done, a variety of different ways.
Okay.
I agree. And a lot of my therapists share, if they find a great website, they'll share the website with other therapists and they pass that along to the parents. So I highly suggest asking other therapists that are around you ideas, because You know, they may know different ideas or different camps, like Debbie mentioned, in the areas that you are. So definitely use those therapists around you as sounding boards for ideas as well.
Really, that's a great idea. And I know in my former school district, we used to group SLPs on teams. And sometimes the whole team would they'd have a meeting one day after school and they'd all bring their ideas. And then somebody would type it up and they just share, So that's a great idea. And now that so many people have iPads and phones, might even start making a list of apps that might be good that are free. So add a
Absolutely.
little technology there. Okay, so some ideas here, continuing on with the summer homework is, remembering that what kind of skills show a lot of regression, and SNR, our two favorite sounds, just kidding, do often show regression. So you might have just a handout with S&R activities that they can do. We talked about general language activities. I like this one, a book reading list. Often you can get that. Some schools post it, and sometimes my media specialist used to have a list by grade level. So that's something to think about. Encourage them to go to the library in the reading hour. You can use from year to year. Actually, I used to do that for a while, and then developing a summer plan, like a packet of things. I found that copying became kind of a hindrance because it's just hard. Everybody's short on paper and the copy machine. So I guess I learned not to make them too large. But you can swap things out from year to year and make them look a little bit different too, so that if you have the same students year after year, they don't get the same thing every year. And then again, I really like the website idea that parents, if you do have a lengthy packet, maybe that's where it can go. The first year always takes the most time for anything, your first year on the job. So kind of just know that. Just kind of keep it simple, but know that it will be so much easier next year. And here are some great summer homework websites. And I have not tried all of these. I like the idea of lots of our tick worksheets for all sounds. And lots of kid activities. Super Duper, of course, always has some kind of freebies on there. So, and then speaking of speech, I have been on that one before. And then, oh yeah, free apps, there they are from Super Duper. So, check these out and encourage your kids and parents to take a look at these too. Okay, and as we just said, as you're finishing out your first school year, if that's what you're doing here, just know that the second year is so much easier, and the third year, you'll just be coasting then. And you've got the hardest part behind you, just making it through that first year and all the stuff you had to learn. I hope you have the opportunity to stay in the district even, because then you don't have to learn a new IEP system or a new way of doing paperwork. But even if you do, and you have to switch to a different school district, once you've learned like the basics of IDEA and the paperwork and the procedures and policies, then it's not that hard to pick up on another school district's variation of it. So you've really learned the hardest part right now, or this year. So it's got to get easier. And so, just kind of thinking of that, we want to finish well. We want, as therapists, we don't want to leave things hanging. We want to kind of leave our job in good shape. And then if we're not the ones coming back next year, that SLP is so going to appreciate you and the work that you did. And it makes you look good, and it also makes our company look good to not leave a bunch of unfinished things there. Okay, so this is our